Hey folks, Jody Thompson with the Habitat Workshop here. I'm in Hodgenville, Kentucky at the LaRue County Environmental Education and Research Center, and I just met with the Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, Kentucky State University Extension, and some local folks about the possibility of using this site as one of our workshops. We've started a program recently where we are training farmers and other landowners how to implement conservation practices. The area around me was installed years ago as a native warm season grass habitat. The reason we're looking at this site is because our next workshop in October, which will probably be in LaRue County, somewhere in the Hodgenville area, it's going to be on competition control and brush management. And the reason we do these workshops is that most folks don't have experience actually implementing conservation practices. If you look at an area like this around me, fields, it's pretty weedy though. Lots of brush, lots of goldenrod, lots of brambles, the rubus here. Let's see if I can get a shot of that. But then you see in here there's there's Johnson grass also. There's a good bit of Johnson grass in here. But then, let me grab some. Yeah, there's things like big bluestem. A lot of big bluestem on this site. But the site hasn't been managed for a number of years. It probably has a little bit early on. But it's just an example of that you have to keep maintenance going on these sites or they turn into something else. But back to the workshops. Most places, for most folks, this kind of work is something you learn on the job. You don't really learn much of this in school. And if you're a farmer, there's going to be some of this work that if you're an experienced farmer, there's going to be some of this work that you are used to. But for the most part, the nuances of native grass and forb habitat, if you don't know what a forb is, just consider it basically most of the stuff that's not grasses. For example, wildflowers are a type of forb. I put together this partnership between several entities in the state, the best of the best, if you want to call it that. We have Kentucky State University, Office of Kentucky Nature Preserves, Roundstone Native Seed, Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, and me. I guess that's where we diverge on the best of the best, the me part. But I do a little bit of this work now and then. And we're trying to establish a permanent program so that there's always these offerings for training, because lots of people are trying to do this kind of work on their own, but they don't know the details. They don't know all of the things that are required to make it successful. We put on our first one back in April, and that first one was how to use a no-till drill, a native seed no-till drill. So that versus a conventional drill just has some other capabilities, everything from how it handles the seed, because native grass and forb seed behaves a little differently than other things will, and so those are specially designed implements for that, and folks will use them to implement conservation practices because maybe they got farm bill money, but they maybe just be not know how to calibrate it the right way. And so in April we brought folks in and we talked a little bit about some different things, conservation programs, and how to select the right species for a particular site. But largely we focused on how to use the drill because it's a major source of error in conservation practices. So what's the next appropriate one? We were thinking competition control and brush management. Competition control largely being what you do before you plant seed, if you're talking about native grasses and forbs, and then brush management, which is the woody things, mostly the trees and the shrubs. And so whether you do a tree planting, whether you're just trying to improve your woodland edges or your interior woodlands, or the native grass and forb installations, those practices are extremely important and essential for long-term success. Here's another example of some stuff going on behind me. A lot of what you see behind me is Johnson grass. Very, very, very aggressive invasive plant. But if you're new to this or you've done very little of it, you may not understand some of the nuances. Like, for example, just doing a foliar spray over this isn't going to be as efficient or it would be more efficient if you cut it first, allow for some regrowth, and then spray it. But also, timing of the sprays, things that are most effective. Are there things you can do that don't require herbicide? Questions like that. Oh, there's a pear tree with pears. I love this time of year. Many years ago, I used to mow a property. I had a part-time lawn maintenance business, and there were pear trees on part of the property, and with permission, I would go and I would just load up the front of my mower with the pears and take them home and snack on them too at the during part of the day. I used to work for state governments, used to work for 2 state governments actually, but now I work for myself. But my main partners, my main collaborators actually are government agencies and the folks who are efficiently getting things done on the ground and who are passionately trying to build and improve programs. And this is one of them. In Kentucky, there is no program, no effective, regular, permanent program to train people how to actually do the conservation work. And that's really the case in most states nationwide also. There's a lot of information out there, a lot of things, a lot of great programs, great essential programs being conducted that talk about issues and that advocate. And there's lots of money, government funding, grant funding, and things like that, and even private funding that goes towards advocating and education. But there's a piece missing on the ground when people are trying to get things done. And most folks don't have the experience to get things done effectively. And so lots of time is wasted, lots of money is wasted, lots of frustration ends up coming out of that. Right behind me, this Japanese honeysuckle, a woody perennial, very invasive vine. This is a typical plant that we would include in brush management practices. It'll smother plants, it gets in the way, it prevents things from growing. And so, we may include in this program what's the most effective way to control this. These conservation workshops are trying to target at farmers and landowners, really trying to target this at farmers. Folks who are interested in just better habitat for different reasons, but and who may be looking to get assistance through the Farm Bill. There's a number of programs in the Farm Bill that help people implement and manage habitats. Lots of goldenrod, lots of brambles. Big blue stem luckily is a tough plant, so it's not going away just because of the weeds. It's just not going to do well. Here is Japanese honeysuckle, if you could see that. So if I could. That's the honeysuckle we all know and love. Here's some more. It's just a huge, huge problem. It's not just a weed, it's an invasive plant. Many of these invasive plants actually contribute to the continued degradation of the habitats they're in. They don't work with the other plants. They're not trying to get along. They'll prevent native plants and things that the other wildlife, everything from vertebrates to invertebrates, need out here. And these invasive plants are not adapted, or at least the native wildlife, they're not adapted to use these plants efficiently. So in situations like this, or at least with things like honeysuckles, fewer wildlife species are using them than are using other things. So they're getting in the way and on all fronts. Here is Sericea lespedeza. We see it just in the edge here, but if we dig a little bit into the habitat, we're going to find more. So it's weedy, it's brushy, it's got this combination of native and non-native plants just really getting in the way. So what do you do about it? The most efficient thing to do and most effective single practice you can do is prescribe fire for this situation specifically. Now with the weeds out here, it's really going to be a combination of, as far as efficiency, a combination of prescribed fire and targeted herbicide treatments. So you have to work, as I've mentioned in a previous video, you have to work to maintain this as open habitat. But if this is the goal, it has to have regular maintenance to do that. So those are some of the things we're trying to convey with these workshops. Not that the habitats are important so much, because the folks coming pretty much already realize that, and it's common knowledge if you've been studying or if you've been involved in or your interest has been you know, native habitat for any amount of time. You've probably heard these messages. Our biggest concern is teaching accurate implementation practices and processes so that it can be done more efficiently. So there's no reason we shouldn't be doing this. There's all the reasons in the world that we should. Lots of walnut. Like I said, natives are causing a problem here. Here's a better shot of, you know, just a little bit more blue stem with a bunch of goldenrod growing in it. So these walnuts are at least a few years old. They're really past the stage of bush hogging for most bush hogs. Fire will take care of them. Fire will not take care of all the weeds. Fire won't kill all of the sericea. It'll kill the plants that are growing above ground. But the seed that's in the soil will continue to be a headache. We have a pretty big project coming up with that partnership I described. Hopefully that starts this year. That will help support this new training program that we're talking about, and help give more assistance to folks on their own lands that are wanting to do this kind of work. So consider this video more of an introduction to that project, more of an introduction to these training programs, these workshops. All of them have been free up to this point. We hope to keep it that way. So, but anyway, just want to give you an introduction to that, and I've got about an hour and a half drive ahead of me to get back to town, to get back to home base and get some things done.